The fourth episode of Star Trek Picard's third and final season has arrived. This episode is titled No-Win Scenario, and with last week's cliffhanger, it's going about as well as you would expect. However, while you might think this episode is one of your typical saving the day at the last moment bits, it actually contains some well-developed conversations between our characters. Additionally, it expands the villains of the show. Note I say villains. Yeah, it gets complicated. Let's dive deeper. Warning, this is a full in-depth review of Star Trek Picard Season 3 Episode 4. As such, you have been warned. Turn away now if you don't want spoilers. I mean it, go. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host Captain Jack. Right, get commenting while you're watching this review. I want to know your best moment from the episode, or on the flip side, your worst moment. Go comment, really go, comment down there. Hit that subscribe button in your way to the comment section, and if you feel like it, the like button as well. Don't forget that this weekend on Sunday at 9 PM GMT, we'll be live on YouTube talking about Picard Season 3 with some special guests. Make sure to tune in. Okay? Engage. Compared to previous episodes, this episode was fairly self-contained. The story essentially took place on the Titan with flashbacks to the same event 5 years prior, around 2396, before the events of Season 1 of Star Trek Picard. Titled No-Win Scenario, the episode is directed by Jonathan Frakes and written by both Sean Tretter and showrunner Terry Matalas. One thing which is great about these flashbacks is they finally reuse a previous uniform instead of making a brand new one. The previous flashback to 2381, when Thaddeus Riker was born and Riker and Picard were celebrating in 10 Forward, they introduced a new Starfleet uniform, which is sort of an in-between of the first contact Starfleet Greys and the 2385 uniform. However, in this flashback of just Picard having some fish and chips in 10 Forward alone in 2396, all the ensigns who surround him from the stories are wearing the uniform previously seen in Season 1 of Picard. So at least we know that uniform lasts from 2396 to 2399. An interesting facet of this scene is that we keep coming back to it throughout the episode. It keeps interfering with our current objective, which I assume is somewhat framed in the same way that these ensigns kept interfering with Picard's lunch. Usually, something like this would affect the momentum of the episode. However, this flashback didn't. Every time we returned to this flashback, it meant something to the current story. A great quote from Picard at the beginning of the episode is, "As long as your crew remains dedicated to one another, you are never without hope," which is what the Titan needs. When we get the no-win scenario, and communicate with one another with a little nod to Darmok, and continue to communicate even when it seems hopeless you die. And finally, the reveal that Jack Crusher did meet Picard 5 years ago in the very same bar. Pretty deep if you ask me. Beverly told him where to find Picard, and he would have been 18 or 19 at this point in time, and Picard not knowing who this young man was at the time, he just Starfleet is his only family. This is what the ensigns expect to hear. But where Picard was at the time, a retired admiral from Starfleet, after a mishandled Romani relocation mission, that family of Starfleet didn't really get him very far. He may get applause from the ensigns, something he'd still get from his speech at Starfleet Academy in Season 2 a few years later, but it didn't get him anyone to share that lunch with. The actual connection he needed and wanted wasn't there. When most ensigns leave, when Starfleet leaves, he, at this point in time, had no one left.
You can't hide from the pain by being alone.
Last episode we had Picard and Riker go head to head, and they both apologise to one another for this episode. But Riker goes one step further. He actually confides in his old friend about what he essentially has been feeling for the last 5 years. He's been running from his grief ever since, even while stuck in Nepenthe, Troy and Kestra, when we meet him in Season 1. In a way, this almost makes the episode of Nepenthe in Season 1 that much sadder. Troy puts on a happy smile, but we know how much pain is underneath. It's no surprise that when Picard asks for help at the end of Season 1, Riker is there and ready, back in an active role as captain aboard the Zhang Ho. Not just because Picard needs help, but it's a further opportunity for Riker to not deal with his repressed grief, and feelings around the death of his son. It's also sad that Troy couldn't really help, despite being a counsellor. Therapy only works if someone wants it to work, and it seems that Riker wasn't even ready to address the feelings around his son's death. Despite this, a scene at the end of Riker and Troy talking to one another via subspace works really well. Riker apologised to Troy and says he is going to work it out with Troy. I'm actually really glad that they get their relationship issues on screen like this, and not like some fan theory suggests that Riker was actually a changeling in disguise. This adds to the human element of the show, and is prime Star Trek of dealing with someone's grief around the death of their son. With a changeling revealed in the last episode, and knowing that Ensign Foster was the one who attacked Jack, Seven goes straight to his quarters. She finds the dead Foster, which at least lets us know the changeling infiltration was recent and possibly while at Space Dock, which probably means a lot more questions. The question is brought about why the Changeling would decide to take the place of an ensign who is a transporter officer. I would then wonder if the transporter has anything to do with Jack's current condition, with the hallucinations and the red branches. This probably isn't the case considering it wasn't him who used the transporter to beam them from the Ilios in episode 2, only that he wasn't the transporter and Jack wanted to hand himself over. Seven is now on the hunt for said Changeling. Riker allows her to hunt it down, but in an unofficial capacity. Funny enough, she goes for Shaw to help, and it's interesting that he seems to be an expert on Changelings. Though I suppose he must have been active during the Dominion War, while Seven was not and in the Delta Quadrant with the USS Voyager. He tasked Seven with finding a Changeling bucket, which should have residue that can use to track the Changeling. This is really the only part of the episode I have a somewhat of a disagreement with, because it isn't the bucket that is special, Changelings just need to change into their liquid form. It doesn't matter what container may hold them really. So the change to have a bucket similar to Odo's, when Odo got the bucket when he wasn't even connected with any other Changeling, seems a bit, hey, remember Odo's bucket to me? If Shaw just said, hey, they need a container to store themselves in when they're liquid, and Seven found a random bucket in the light fixture, which had the residue, I would have no issue with that, it would make more sense. In the end, Seven lays a trap for the Changeling, telling no one to be sent into cell control. So when Sidney LaForge comes in cell control and calls Seven Commander Hansen, they know this is the Changeling and seemingly stun it. I'm not sure they stun it or outright kill it, but it's one or the other. I do have to say, it's nice that not only was the Commander 7 scene from Sydney to Seven a nice scene for these two characters, but it also foreshadowed this scene and gave the audience enough knowledge to know what is up. It's some great writing. Since the reveal of the Changelings, people have been wondering if Vadic and her crew were also Changelings. The weird residue Riker remarked on from the disintegrated goons of Vadic on the Ilios would lead me to believe had a vendetta against Starfleet and would have been given a ship, and part of a Changeling to get their revenge. Vadic even uses a Riemann knife to cut her hand off, gruesome, which has some theory crafting brains while at work. Could she be Shinzon's surrogate mum, perhaps someone against a Romulan relocation effort? We'll have to see if this connection, or it's just a cool knife she has. Bit weird though. Anyway, the Changeling forms into a face, which orders Vadic to drop her portal weapon and pursue the Titan to recover the asset, which they call Jack Crusher. Why Jack Crusher is the asset? It could be related to these Red Door hallucinations, but these hallucinations seem to be a recent occurrence, and we'll have to keep watching to find out. But who could this Changeling face be? Seemingly the big bag boss of season 3? I believe this could be Lars, one of 100 Changelings who was sent out by the Great Link and wanted to find other Changeling siblings in order to create a new Great Link. You might need to go watch this DS9 episode. He did have a hatred for solids, and I mean an absolute hatred, and maybe after seeing the Dominion losing and the original Great Link refusing to continue their crusade, split and went to start his own crusade. This probably makes the most sense, but also because it's one of the only other Changelings we know, as I doubt it's a female Changeling, as surely she's still in the Federation holding facility after the war. So this episode, Picard wants time with Jack and goes to the holodeck to discuss things with him, ask him questions and just get to know one another. Even while watching this scene, I was wondering why they would be using the holodeck if the ship was having power issues. But Jack even brings up this point, like an average Star Trek fan would, with Picard stating it has an independent power cell for moments just like this. The fact that the writing is aware of what it's doing and makes steps to stop people from crying out of a plot hole, it's worth noting that this exact point was brought up in a Voyager episode, with the holodeck having its own power system, which is incompatible with other ship systems. So even if Picard didn't say why they could use a holodeck, it would still be fine. A great element of this talk between Picard and Jack is the framing of the scene. The person who asks the questions is the one behind the bar, which is the framing you expect from a bar scene like this, and just goes to enhance who is the one confiding in the other. Now, the name of this episode is No-Win Scenario, and this plays over multiple layers, as one of the previous episodes have had their titles. Not only is it tied in a no-win scenario, but during this talk between Picard and Jack, they bring up Jack's namesake, Jack Crusher, the original by the way. This has been a question on the mind of a lot of people. Why did Beverly call her and Picard's son after a former husband? Obviously Picard and Jack were very good friends in the Academy and in their Stargazer days. We even get some confirmation from Picard and himself that he would have actually called his son Jack Crusher as well. But back to the no-win scenario. We get a story from Picard about him and Jack during the Stargazer days. Before Picard was a captain of a ship, stealing a shuttle to make a date with some women on a planet. The ship was hit by asteroids and they had very little power, but together, with one of them on navigation and one of them on thrusters, they made it out alive. Essentially their own no-win scenario, they managed to survive by working together. This story not only foreshadows the solution for escaping the no-win scenario the current Titan is in, but also the reasoning behind the solution in the actual story. Jack actually used the story, told to him by Picard mere minutes prior, as a solution to get them out of the nebula. Some we all had theorized since the first episode when we saw the ending credits and the report on the destruction of the USS Constance at the same stardate as Worlf 359, was that Captain Liam Shaw was at Worlf 359, and is the reason why he hates the Borg and was so spiteful towards Seven and Picard in the first episode. I was somewhat hoping that this being revealed in the episode would have an unredacted report in the end credits, which would have been cool, but alas, that's not the case. Shaw is probably only vocal about this due to the pain meds, but talks about how Picard, as Locutus, caused Worlf 359. He is clearly dealing with a lot of survivor's guilt from this, being a low-level grease monkey, as he refers to himself, and also just a dipshit from Chicago, but still being one of the 10 picked to escape the USS Constant on the last life pod. This probably is the reason why Vadic was talking about Shaw being unfunctional in the past, by having access to his profile, knowing about his history. In my eyes, this makes Shaw so much more fascinating as a character, and it does seem to be part of his character arc, working with Picard 7 to actually get over his trauma and become a better person. Now, Dr. Beverly Crusher throughout this episode is counting down the power surges from the nebula, and deduces that the organic readings of the nebula is a womb and that it is in labour. The gases there inside are actually amniotic fluid. In quite an amazing briefing scene around the table, you have Picard Crusher family actually coming up with a plan to get out of a gravity well, using the energy surges of the labour contractions to power the ship and get them out of there. Again, like previously, Jack Crusher recalling the story he was just told by Picard as a solution to get the ship out. Riker agrees and they get to work together as a full team and to get out the nebula. Riker even gives Picard the con, given his experience, and Picard asks Jack to spot the incoming asteroids to maneuver around them. They rely on each other and manage to power the ship with the help of Shaw as well, requiring an old-time grease monkey to open and sell grills, considering the ship is a refit of a 20-year-old model and none of the current engineers could do it in time. I wouldn't like to meet the chief engineer as he sounds useless, or they sound useless. This does continue the discussion of this ship, is it a refit or is it not, and I continue to think that some elements of the ship are the ones from the Titan, internal systems and such, which explains why Shaw purged Riker's jazz and the nacelle controls are similar but the frame itself. We do even have a role reversal between the Shrike and the Titan, with Riker managing to throw a whole asteroid at the Shrike to get it out of the way, as revenge for the Shrike throwing the Ilios at the Titan. Our crew may have escaped the no-win scenario, but with the changeling threat infiltrating Starfleet, will they be returning home to friend or foe? The episode No Win Scenario was written by showrunner Terry Matalas and Sean Tretter, with the great Jonathan Frakes directing. Speaking about Frakes as a director in this episode, he did an exceptional job. Even better than last episode in my opinion. His grasp on not only Trek, but also filmmaking in general is excellent. His use of blocking and where the characters are and the shots further enhance the script written by Matalas and Tretter. How much the director has said in regards to VFX shots for this episode, I do not know, but some of the visuals in this episode were stellar, especially with the Titan riding a power surge contractions and the energy surging into the nacelles. In a way, this episode dealt with many emotional ramifications between characters, and were quite open about what they needed and how they were feeling. With Riker talking about his grief from losing his son and how he's running from it. He was distant to Troy, and when Picard came knocking in season 1, he jumped at the occasion to run from his troubles. Meanwhile, we have Picard saying even if Jack doesn't need the connection, he does. He wants a connection with his son and is open about it. Then we come to Shaw, the pain meds talking and still being kind of a dipshit, but being vocal about what he was and is still dealing with. That survives guilt from surviving a battle of Worlf 359, being chosen randomly to survive and wondering if that was the right choice. This episode being very contained to the action of the Titan worked extremely well. The episode could function by itself without the overarching plot, which I always think is great in these more serialized stories, but you can have these standalone episodes. They still connect to a larger story, and that works really well. The music as well, composed by Stephen Burton, came into its own this episode. Previous episodes, I thought it relied too much on Trek themes of the past, but this episode has some great scores which were wholly unique and stood out amongst the greats of the past. So we've captured our changeling on the Titan, seen the face of our enemy, what next? We gotta look forward to episode 5, titled Imposter, next week. So what did you think of Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 4? If you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media or join our community Discord server. For now, I've been Captain Jack, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you this time next week for our next Picard review. Live long and prosper, my friends. Goodbye.